fall off of here. Please come help me. How many of you are in a relationship?
Any kind.
Is there anybody who didn't raise your hand? Got a mom? Got a dad? Got children? Neighbors? Co-workers? Friends? If you don't have any of those, then you're really in the right place. Because this is about relationship, and growing spiritually requires it. This is different from the way people have looked at relationship in the past and spirituality in the past, because in the past, at least if you were like me, and you thought of spirituality and spiritual growth and enlightenment, that meant going inward by yourself, maybe joining a monastery or a nunnery, and then from there withdrawing even further to a hermitage or a cave, until you are able to, unimpeded, explore your own inner dynamics and find those things that kept you from the broader, more loving, compassionate, and wise perception of yourself in the world. Now, everyone is longing to do that because we're in the midst of a great transformation in human consciousness that's unlike any that has occurred before. So I'll talk about this transformation, but I'm mentioning it now because it's changing our perception of everything, of ourselves, of power, of relationship. And I'm going to speak to you about relationship in a way that might be 180 degrees different from the way that you have thought about relationships in the past. So it's not just a little different, it might be very different. But it's always good to get a new perspective so that you can see how to use relationship. For example, I was told a story once about two pilots, a pilot and a co-pilot, who were flying to the United States for the first time, and they had only been pilots for a while, and they were flying a commercial jet. And as they approached the airport, the pilot said to the co-pilot, 80% thrust, 10% flaps. Yes, Captain, 80%. And a little while later, 60% thrust, 15% flaps. Yes, Captain. And they're still high and they're still hot. And the captain says, 40% thrust, 30% flaps. Yes, Captain. And they're still high and they're still hot. Now the runway's approaching. And he says, cut thrust, 40% flaps. Yes, Captain. And the big wheels touched the runway, and at that moment the captain said, full reverse thrust, full brakes. Yes, Captain. And this big plane just skidded to a stop, and its nose wheel was only 3 or 4 feet from the end of the pavement. And they both leaned back and said, wow. And the captain says, oh, the runways in this country sure are short. And the co-pilot says, yeah, but look how wide. Now, if he had had a different perception of how to use the runway, his experience of the runway would have been quite a bit different than it was. If you have a different perception of how to use your relationships, and you will, you'll find that you're going to be able to use relationships in a way that you haven't in the past. And it's going to be surprising. It's not going to be any easier, but it's going to be much, much more rewarding and meaningful. Ah, now that was a cause for celebration for someone. Suppose when you think someone angers you, or makes you jealous, or upsets you in some way, that it's not actually that other person that's having that effect on you. Suppose that that person isn't making you angry or jealous or upset. Suppose that that person is only activating something in you that gives you that experience of being upset or angry or jealous. In other words, suppose the cause isn't exterior to you, but interior. Well, you can test this to see if that's the case with you. Now think of the last time that you got angry, someone made you angry. Now think of the time before that someone made you angry. If it was the same person, think of the time before that. In fact, to make sure that it's not the same person, go way back to a time that you remember when you got angry in the same way. Now, if you're going back farther enough, it can't be the same person. In fact, that experience of anger predated your relationship with the person you thought was making you angry. Do you see where I'm going with this? The person who made you angry was just the latest in a long line of triggers. Triggers that activated. Okay, everybody turn them off. Now's a good time. I can say that with comfort now because last night my new cell phone it either died or it's in a deep coma. So it was not the person that made you angry, but the person that triggered your anger, and that person was just the latest in a long history of triggers. Now, if that's the case, and you can see for yourself that it is, then what good does it do to try to change the trigger if your objective is not to become angry anymore, or not to experience the pain of being angry, or not to experience the results of being angry, which is that you push people away. They don't feel safe with you. They won't allow themselves to be vulnerable with you, and you feel isolated and lonely because you're angry. So if you want to avoid that, how helpful will it be to change the trigger of this latest experience of anger? Entirely futile. Has no effect at all on your anger. In other words, you can try to change the trigger, and there's lots of ways to do that. I mentioned getting angry. Some people shout when they get angry. Some people withdraw emotionally. Some people get weepy. Some people try guilt. And maybe one of those manipulations might be successful in changing the behavior of the trigger. And the trigger will say, I'm so sorry I said that. Oh, don't cry, it's all right. All right, don't get upset, it's just a thought. And then for a moment, you're not angry anymore until the next trigger activates the same dynamic. Are you following me? I know it sounds basic, it is basic, but I'm asking if you follow because this is at the heart of everything that I want to share with you. This is it. If you use your relationships to try to change other people, you're not going to change. You're going to spend a lot of time trying to change someone else or other people. Sometimes you'll be successful. If you're successful, you'll only create distance from that person. And in fact, all that you'll create will be violence and destruction. Emotional violence and emotional destruction. The same dynamic occurs between nations, except then it's physical violence and physical destruction. So, where does that leave us now with relationship? It leaves us looking up the runway the right way, instead of across the runway trying to figure out how we're going to take off now in that little space. When you use your relationships to change you, to learn about yourself and change in you what has tormented you all your life, then you're using your relationships to grow spiritually. Well, that's it. That's my talk. articulation becomes more clear every time I do this. So, from now going forward, let's look at what that actually feels like, how it unfolds, what it feels like to you in the experience. Well, let me give you an example from my life. I had a mother who adored me. She didn't adore my sister, but we had different experiences of her. But my experience was one of unadulterated attention whenever I even felt like I needed it, of paying her, putting her entire focus on me, of loving me, of lavishing me with love. Well, I didn't realize at the time that there might have been something else besides love in all of that. She did love me, I have no doubt of that. But I do know that years and years later, I could see clearly that I wanted the same thing from whatever partners that I had. And it wasn't until quite a while later in my life that I was even able to be in a real relationship. And that was about 17 years ago. And that was with Linda Francis, who's a spiritual partner of mine, and also my life partner. And it became very clear to me that when I didn't get from Linda what I got from my mother, it irritated me or annoyed me. And sometimes I got angry. For example, I'd be saying something that was important to me or I thought was brilliant, and she'd yawn, or say, uh-oh, I think I left the soup on, and she'd run into the kitchen. Wait, come here. My mother never did that, and I didn't make the connection between the two. But when I did, I could realize that Linda was triggering something in me. She wasn't causing it in me. All the moments of thinking, if I had another partner who never went to check the soup just when I was explaining my most profound insight for the next book, then I wouldn't have these experiences. But that didn't last long because I realized that I would. Sooner or later, somebody'd have to go to the bathroom while I'm talking to them. And I'd get upset again. That part of me would get upset again. So I realized that's what I've got to change. I've got to change me. That was a disappointment because I hadn't pictured the spiritual path in quite that way. I thought that I didn't even picture it that way at all. I thought that I could ascend above these things, or detour around those things, or distract myself from those things, or maybe just bury those things and walk over them. But I realized that I couldn't do any of those, that I was going to have to experience all of them, that I was going to have to go through all of those experiences consciously and change them in me in order to grow spiritually. Wow. Couldn't be that bad. But it turns out it was that good. I could no longer feel the same satisfaction of railing against the universe for its injustice and all the things that I felt. I could no longer engage in a conspiracy theory. I'd still feel the way I felt, whether the theory were true or not. I had to change myself if I were going to change. Well, for a long time, I didn't realize that I even wanted to change. I was angry. I was a sex addict. I was riding motorcycles. I was emotionally violent. I thought I was manly. I thought all manly men smoked this cigarette, the same one that the cowboys smoked. And then when I finished the last drag, they put it on the ground and they snuff it out with their boot. Well, I did all that. It really didn't make me as happy as I thought I was. For one thing, because I never stopped being jealous of other people or wanting to be manly. For another, because no matter how much sex I had, I was always looking for another woman to have more sex. Which should have been my first clue that sex wasn't really the thing that I was after. But it never occurred to me. And so my life continued, just like a rolling wheel, without any intervention, unconscious. In Buddhism, they call that wheel, that rolling wheel, samsara. It's your life, and it unfolds robotically, habitually. You continue to encounter the same experiences and react in the same way and create the same consequences, which cause you to encounter the same experiences, and on and on and on. And by that, the Buddhists mean lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, not just a few days or a few years. Now, the way out of that, according to the Buddha, is something called the Eightfold Path, which is a good path, but it's a path designed for a species that we are no longer. It's a path designed for a species that is confined in its perceptions to the five senses. But we are now expanding beyond the limitations of the five senses. The five senses together form a single sensory system whose object of detection is physical reality. And now we're acquiring another sensory system. We have two sensory systems. One of them detects physical reality, and the other detects intelligence, wisdom, compassion, and more that is real but not physical. And it's changing us a lot. It's not making us any more patient or less angry. It's not making us more grateful and less vengeful. It's making us more aware. Now, what are we going to do with our awareness? This new awareness is bringing with it great potential that didn't exist before. And bringing that potential into being in you is now a spiritual path. And it requires you changing you, not you changing someone else. Because you attempting to change someone else is the pursuit of external power. It's pursuing the ability to manipulate and to control. And that's the way we've looked at power since we've been a human species. Would everyone pretty much agree with that? Power is the ability to manipulate and to control. This means, by the way, there's a lot of things that we can say about power. Some people have more than others. For example, if you're a very wealthy person, we say you've got more power than someone who's not very wealthy. If you're a very beautiful person and you can manipulate people with your appearance, then you have more power over others. If you're a strong person and you can intimidate others with your size and your strength, then you have more power. We say that the professional has more power than the janitor that cleans the office. That's external power. Here's something else about it. It comes and it goes. You can inherit it, you can gain it, you can lose it. Your portfolio can go way up, and then a recession can come and it'll go way down. And so you have less power. You might be beautiful and you can manipulate people with your beauty, but you're going to get old sooner or later and your appearance is going to change. What will you do then? Or you're going to get ill if you're strong. That's the nature of external power. It's transient. It's the ability to manipulate and to control, and it's the only kind of power that we've known until now. And now there's another kind of power. And that kind of power is very closely related to the way that you are learning to use relationships. That power is the alignment of yourself with the most noble, healthy part of yourself that you can possibly reach for. The part that intends harmony and cooperation and sharing and reverence for life. And that part is the part of you that is immortal. That's the part that existed before you were born and will continue to exist after you die. So I'm speaking to you now as one multisensory person to another. And you'll know if you're multisensory or not. Because if you are, what I'm saying to you about yourself having an immortal component that existed before your birth and will exist after your death will resonate in some way. It'll either resonate because you will feel that's right somehow, and it feels appropriate, or has a good feeling to it. Or you'll resonate because you'll say, that is nonsense. That is really not true. That is, and you'll judge it. That's resonance too, but resonance that triggers fear, and you push away what you resonate with. If you don't resonate with it at all, you'll simply know that for you that's not so. And that'll be the beginning and the end of the matter. It's the emotional reaction that I'm drawing your attention to. So if the new power is the alignment of your personality with this highest, most noble part of yourself, the part that existed before you were born and that will exist after you die, then let's say, for our discussion, because we're Westerners for the most part, that part of you is your soul. The new perception of power that's emerging is the alignment of your personality with your soul. Well, everyone here, I feel, is going to agree with the goals of harmony and cooperation and sharing and reverence for life. Everyone here loves to be loving. Well, I love to be loving too, and I find it very easy when I'm loving. I find it easy when people are loving to me. But how easy is it for you to be loving when you're angry, when you're so angry that you're shaking, when you're so jealous that you can feel this corrosive acid flowing through you? How easy is it to be loving when things are not going the way you want them to, when you feel you've been betrayed or deceived? That's the catch. If you're going to create authentic power, then you're going to have to be loving in those moments too. And in fact, it's in those very moments that you create authentic power. Now suppose you use your relationships to achieve that. Suppose you use your relationships consciously to notice whenever anything was triggered in you that keeps you from being loving, that keeps you from creating harmony and cooperation and sharing and reverence for life, then all of your relationships would be precious to you. And not just those with people that love you and respect you and appreciate you, but also with those people who don't. Because they will be some of the best triggers you're ever going to find. The Dalai Lama said we can learn more from our enemies than we can from our friends. And I suspect this is what he might have had in mind. So how do you go about doing it? It takes it takes intention for one thing. It takes commitment, it takes courage, it takes compassion, and it takes conscious communication and action. Well, let me give you a story that might illustrate this, and then we'll go into what it means for you. The story is about a Zen master named Hakuin. Hakuin is thought to be one of the founders, or the founder, of a Japanese Zen sect of Buddhism. And he was quite famous in his day, which I think was at the end of the 1500s. Maybe the 1600s. But he was well known in Japan. And a samurai decided to come to Hakuin because he wanted to know how to find the gates of heaven and how to find the gates of hell. So he found Hakuin. Hakuin came to the door and he asked him the question. And Hakuin looked at the samurai and he said, "Oh, you call yourself a samurai? Look at your clothes, you're dirty. And you have a beard, you have probably been shaved." And the samurai got offended. You know, in those days, in any days, being around a samurai was very dangerous because samurai had a license to kill, and they took it frequently. So the samurai was becoming upset and put his hand went to the hilt of his big sword. And Hakuin said, "Ah, I see you have a sword. probably rusty, judging from the rest of you. That did it. Hakuin had stepped over the line, and the samurai started to pull his sword from the scabbard. At that moment, Hakuin's life was in grave jeopardy. But Hakuin said, "Here open the gates of hell." And the samurai froze and thought for a minute. And then he put his sword back in the scabbard and said, like that. And Hakuin said, "Here open the gates of heaven." Now put yourself in the position of the samurai for a moment. No one dares confront you, especially people who aren't samurai. So you are accustomed to saying and doing whatever you want, and people being deferential to you. But Hakuin was not deferential to the samurai. Suppose you were in that position, what would you feel? Anger? Rage? How could he? This monk is going to die in a minute. How much rage did that samurai have roaring through him? If it was a lot, and I suspect it might have been, how much courage and focus did it take for him to stop it in motion and consider what Hakuin had just said to him, and then to take another step and to sheathe his weapon. Well, let's make it more personal. How much courage would it take for you when someone triggers an interior part of your personality and you can feel rage coming, or righteousness, or indignation, or superiority, or inferiority, and you begin to pull the weapon, and you're going to use it? How much courage and intention would it take for you in that moment to stop? And then how much more courage would it take to put the weapon back? And instead of shouting or withdrawing or becoming enraged, say something from the most healthy, constructive, grounded part of yourself that you could possibly reach. That is the creation of authentic power in that moment. Now, how many moments like that do you have in your relationships? Well, your relationship with the mailman, your relationship with the clerk at the grocery store, now and then you get some moments like that. But the more intimate or long-standing and enduring of your relationships, the more those opportunities come. The longest of these relationships, the most enduring and the most challenging, are those with your parents. The parent-child relationship is the most difficult, because all of the challenges of the parent interlock with the challenges of the child. And you'll find, if you look back over your relationship with your parents, even if they're deceased, because it's not too late to do this work with them, because it's not with them, it's with you. You'll find that the strengths that you need to develop to relate in the most healthy, grounded, loving ways with your parents are the very same strengths that you need to develop in order to move into your full potential, in order to give the gifts that you were born to give. And as you become multisensory, you know that you have gifts to give. You can sense it somehow. You can sense it because until you give them, you have no real, deep, rich, full meaning in your life. And you can't give those gifts when you're angry, and it controls you. And you can't give your gifts when you're jealous, and it controls you. And you can't give those gifts when you want to eat some more and you don't need it, and that controls you, or you need more sex, or you need to watch pornography, or you need to gamble or smoke or drink or use drugs. You can't give those gifts when you're obsessive and you can't stop working 10 hours a day. Or you're a perfectionist and you can't stop cleaning up and arranging everything, including other people. So finding these parts of your personality and having the courage to experience them by not acting on them, feeling the pain and the power of them, feeling them as physical sensations in your body, for example, in your throat, in your chest, in your solar plexus area, and not acting on them consciously as a challenge to that part of your personality. That is a part of the spiritual path. That is the center of the spiritual path. That is the core of the spiritual path, because when you feel a frightened part of your personality roaring through you, pushing you, shoving you, demanding that you, magnetically attracting you to do exactly what you've done before, again and again and again. And in that moment, instead of doing it, which takes the pressure off, which eases you for a moment, there's a certain satisfaction in screaming or yelling or winning a power struggle. It's an empty victory, but it's a temporary anesthetic. You don't feel that pain in that very moment. And these are powerful, real dynamics that I'm sharing with you, and you can experiment with them yourself. For example, all of the sex that I had when I was addicted to sex, I didn't say I did that because I'm frightened. I wasn't even thinking in those terms. Wherever I went, I was looking for the person I could seduce, because it turns out that sex was one of the few pleasures I had in an otherwise very painful life. And I got a certain feeling of safety and value, even if for a fleeting moment, in being able to seduce someone else. And healing an addiction, by the way, as I healed this one, is this part of the spiritual path, no matter what your addiction is. Part of it was, I'll just share an insight that helped me along the path. And that is, I mentioned that I felt so manly and admirable. And I continued to feel that way until it occurred to me one day that the women that I was with didn't care any more about me than I cared about them. And that's when it didn't seem admirable anymore. I used to smoke a lot too. I would think that would be manly until one day I looked at my fingers and they were yellow. And I remembered a medical report that said lung tissue of a non-smoker is pink and pliable, and the lung tissue of the smoker is gray and filled with flecks of tar. It was something like that. When I saw how little I meant to the women that I was having sex with, there was an ugliness to the whole dynamic that I hadn't ever seen or dreamed could exist. And yet, that was my life for so long. Because parts of my personality that felt so powerless kept pushing me to do what they wanted, what they needed to feel valuable or safe. Well, what is it that you have that does that to you? Do you need to work? Do you need to drink? Do you need to gamble? Do you need to watch pornography? Do you get angry uncontrollably? Jealous? You might look at all of our experiences as a curriculum. All of your experiences as a unique curriculum in a school, the Earth School. That's the time that extends from your birth until your death. And everything that occurs in that school occurs so that you can grow spiritually. This is a new perception. This is a multisensory perception. Now, there have been multisensory humans throughout human history. All of our religions are named after them. And there have been many others who don't have religions named after them. But what's new is that the entire human species is becoming multisensory in just a few generations. And you're among them. But by the time my grandchildren have grandchildren, those children, if they even know about me, would read a book like The Seat of the Soul, and say, well, I thought great-grandpa was a visionary, but what's visionary about this? Because it won't be possible at that time even to imagine somebody who's not multisensory, who doesn't see a larger fabric of life than the five senses can reveal. It'll be as impossible to imagine such a person as it is for us now to imagine somebody who doesn't have a consciousness. So now back to relationships. As you use your relationships to change yourself rather than to change the people you're in relationship with, you step onto a different path. Before, you're on the horizontal path. When you're on the horizontal path, things change, circumstances change. You change partners, change cities, change jobs. But you don't change. And wherever you go, whomever you're with, the same issues reemerge and continue to reemerge. What I'm describing to you now is the vertical path. When you're on the vertical path, you change. And you use all of your experiences to change you, to show you what exists in you that originates in fear and what originates in love. And then choose love, no matter what you're experiencing inside and no matter what is going on around you. Now, I finished my talk again. Thank you. What is a spiritual partnership? A spiritual partnership is a partnership between equals for the purpose of spiritual growth. And spiritual growth means creating authentic power. And what is real power? It's not the ability to manipulate and to control. So if you're using your relationships to try to manipulate and to control someone else so that you'll feel better and safe, you're on the horizontal path. You're not growing spiritually. You're not changing. And you're creating additional painful consequences for yourself that are identical to or very similar to the consequences that you've created in the past. Spiritual partnership is a new dynamic. It's a dynamic that attracts multisensory humans who are intending to change themselves and are not content to change others, who have the commitment and the courage and the compassion and are developing the conscious communication and action to use their lives entire, to change themselves, not to please other people, not to keep a relationship together, not to go to heaven, but because they themselves have reached a point in their lives where they know that they do not want and will not continue to create in the same way. That they no longer want to be controlled by their anger or their jealousy. It's too painful. It's too hurtful to them, and it's too hurtful to others. And they know that there's no other way to change except to change themselves. When you come to that place and you start to act on it, that puts you on the spiritual path. Now suppose that you're in a relationship with someone that's doing the same thing. that relationship has the potential of being a spiritual partnership. And it's very different from a friendship. It's very different from most family relations. Wherever you are, whomever you're with, the potential of a spiritual partnership exists, whether it's in your biological family, whether it's with co-workers, with fellow students, with neighbors, with friends, provided the other person is also striving for self-awareness, emotional awareness, and self-responsibility. If they're not, you can't create a spiritual partnership with that person. But you can create authentic power while you're interacting with that person.